right. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I now call the Finance Subcommittee meeting of April 24th, 2025 to order. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Madam City Clerk, do we have any comments?
There are no comments.
Thank you. On to the next item, we have the consent calendar. 3A, approve the meetings of the Finance Subcommittee meeting of April 18th, 2024.
So moved.
I'll second that. Roll call, please.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Tave is absent. Treasurer Swearingen. I think I heard an aye. Treasurer Swearingen? Yes. Thank you. And Mayor Sasai.
Yes.
Okay, so moved. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item 4A, the fiscal year 25-26 financial and investment policies. Director Guillory, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yes. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mayor, City Treasurer Swearingen, members of the public, and staff that are in attendance. I have a presentation coming up just short. There it is. So for this item, I'll be giving an update on the financial and investment policies as we gear up for the fiscal year 2025-26. Next slide. And staff's recommendation is for the Finance Subcommittee to review the proposed policies, I should say 2024-20 or 2025-26 financial and investment policies, and if you have any recommendations for us to bring those forward to the City Council for adoption of the policies. Next slide. So just some background on this item. Financial policies are intended to set guidelines on how the city will manage its financial resources and provide direction for financial decision-making. It is a best practice that is set by the Government Finance Officers Association, and many public agencies review and update their financial policies regularly, typically during the budget process. City policies align with standard financial policies recommended by professional associations, as I mentioned. And the best practice is to establish financial policies and review those periodically. The city is in compliance with its financial and investment policies, and we'll get into more of what those policies contain and their guidance in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So the purpose of financial policies is several items here. So adopting formal written policies includes their ability to help the government institutionalize good financial management policies, and which sets the standards for not only finance staff, but also staff across the organization on matters related to finance. To clarify strategic intent for financial management and set guidance. To define boundaries. To support credit ratings if the city decides to go out for any bond issuances or any debt financing. It helps to have good financial policies in place. It's to promote long-term strategic financial planning and to manage risks related to financial condition, and also to comply with established public management best practices. Next slide. So for the next few, I'll just give an overview of each of the city's financial policies. So the first is the structurally balanced budget policy, and it says that the city will aim to create a proposed general fund operating budget that is structurally balanced, meaning that current expenditures will be funded by current year's revenue. So ongoing or recurring revenue will support ongoing and recurring expenditures. If the proposed budget is not structurally balanced, the city will develop a plan to bring the balance into the positive position for the subsequent fiscal year. Next slide. The next is the reserve policy, and it states that the city will establish and maintain reserves equal to 50% of the total general fund expenditures, and that the city is able to use those financial resources to provide basic municipal services in the event of a significant unanticipated revenue decrease or expenditure increase. The city aims to maintain that balance. It should be noted that for the fiscal year 2024-25, that the city did do a one-time transfer from the general reserves into the general fund to balance the budget, and that amount was about $844,000. And so currently, we're at 42% of the total, or our general reserves are at 42% of the total general fund expenditures. Next slide. The revenue policy for one-time items, or what we call non-recurring, says that the city will aim to maintain a diversified and stable revenue base that is not overly dependent on any one individual revenue type. Also, that one-time resources, also referred to as non-recurring, should be used for one-time expenditures. So, for example, using a portion of what we call our unassigned fund balance for capital improvement projects or one-time initiatives is an allowable use of that source of financial resources. However, it is not advisable to use things like the fund balance for ongoing expenditures. Next slide. The next is the revenue policy for user fees and charges. The city of Pinole is empowered to recapture through fees up to the full cost of providing specific services. You recently had an item on the update of the master fee schedule. So this is tied to that policy where we do regular and consistent review of all fees to ensure that the costs are associated with the delivery of individual services and that we are recovering up to 100% of the cost to the extent possible. Next slide. For the expenditure and budget policy, it says that the city aims to deliver service in the most efficient and cost-effective manner. This includes utilizing volunteers in areas where operationally and economically viable. We have a number of volunteers, for example, in our community services department. But as we develop budgets, we're looking at the most cost-effective ways to formulate our budget as we're looking at expenditures, especially for our non-personnel items, and determining when it's best to outsource certain services, or not outsource, but use consulting services for various services to augment staffing. Next slide is the debt policy, and it says that the city will limit the use of debt so as not to place a burden on the fiscal resources of the city and its taxpayers. We are way below our debt limit here in the city. As you may recall, we only have outstanding debt of the 2006 pension obligation bonds, which is paid from the general fund, and then we have a couple of debt issuances in the sewer enterprise. Next slide. For the receivables policy, the city aims to ensure the timely invoicing, monitoring, and collection of outstanding obligations owed to the city. So, for example, for business license renewals, there's a cutoff date or a deadline for when those should be submitted. And for those that go over, we are in contact with those businesses to make sure that we are receiving those funds in a timely manner. So we do track and monitor and attempt to recover any receivables that we have outstanding. Next slide. The grants management policy and procedure says that city departments will actively pursue federal, state, and other grant opportunities when deemed appropriate. So the city is always actively looking for grants to augment the funding sources that we receive from other sources. The city is currently working with Towns and Public Affairs also to assist us in those efforts to pursue grants, and so we continue to do that in alignment with this policy. Next slide. The capital assets policy and procedure says that purchased and donated assets meeting the city's capitalization definition and threshold of $5,000 will be classified and recorded in the city's financial records as capital assets. So we do have a system that tracks all of the city's assets, from really large pieces of equipment or vehicles all the way down to our laptop computers that we use in our day-to-day work. Next slide. The unclaimed and outstanding checks policy and procedures says that the city will account for unclaimed funds in a manner which follows government code and state law. and funds that remain unclaimed for at least 3 years will become the property of the city after procedures identified have been followed, and that includes placing notices in the newspaper for any unclaimed funds before we turn them over as property of the city. Next slide. The investment policy's purpose is to define the parameters within which funds are to be managed and the ways that we invest funds, as well as the types of instruments that we can invest in, and those are mapped out in our investment policy. The goal is to keep our risk very low, to make sure that we're investing in liquid products, so things that we can convert to cash quickly if we need to, but most importantly, safeguarding the city's assets so we're not investing in risky instruments. Next slide. And then lastly is the pension investment policy. So this is related to the Section 115 trust. And the goal of the plan's investment program is to provide a reasonable level of growth, which will result in sufficient assets to offset a portion of the present and future obligations of retirement benefits provided by the CalPERS system. So we have a separate fund that we keep this funding in, and we have a customized portfolio that PARS, or Public Agency Resources, helps us with managing so that we can leverage interest income on those funds. Next slide. So that concludes my presentation or overview on all of the city's investment policies. We are not recommending any changes at this time. We plan to incorporate any recommendations that you may have, if any, tonight, and then we'll present the policies for adoption on May 6th. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation, and I'll pass it along to Treasurer Swearingen for any questions he might have.
No questions.
Thank you. Just want to confirm, so from last year's policies, no changes at all?
No changes at all.
Gotcha. One thing that catches my attention straight off the bat here is the general fund reserve policy.
Yes.
One thing that's in there is that the council should endeavor to replenish those funds in the next year's budget, which is what we're reviewing for this year.
Yes.
Right now, so you said we had expended approximately $800,000 of the general fund reserve, so reducing it from the full 50% to 42%.
42%. Yes.
Will we be in, well, this is actually more appropriate for conversation for the next items. But one thing that I'm wondering, it brings me back to the conversation we had when we had the long-term financial plan come back to council last year. In there, one of the recommendations was to reduce the general fund reserve percentage.
Yes.
Do you recall the recommendations, the specific percentages that was mentioned in the document?
Yeah, so the average, just looking at other agencies, some of our neighboring communities, some of the communities of the same size as Pinole, is about 25%, and that was the recommendation in that report.
Gotcha. Any cities in the area that you have seen be higher than 25%?
Not as a policy matter, even if they allow it to go over, I've seen 25 for the most part, and that's about 3 months of expenditure coverage.
Got it. Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's no recommended changes to the current policy here. I don't plan on making any recommendations at this point.
Okay.
But I would like that information to come back just as a refresher for the full council when we do actually take up the item for this policy.
Yes.
Would it be possible to bring that information?
It's actually going to be included in the budget
And that includes,
presentation as an option to explore.
Gotcha. And that includes the neighboring jurisdictions and the comparisons to.
I can include that information, the comparisons.
That'd be great.
Okay, we'll do.
Sounds good. I have no further questions. I'm going to bring it to public comment. City Clerk Bill, if you have any.
I do. Thank you. Rafael Menes.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Treasurer, staff, members of the public. My name is Rafael Menes. I'm a resident of Pinole. And I would just like to reiterate my written comment that I submitted to this committee. I believe that the current strategic asset allocation as listed on page number 48 of the agenda packet or page number 30 of the policies is excessively skewed toward equities given the current volatility in the stock and frankly bond markets as well. And that the city should consider at the very least reducing its policy level inequities to shift more towards fixed income or cash, especially given not just the volatility, but also the shorter time horizon of the Section 115 trust in particular, which is expected to expire in 2030 or 2031. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Irma report.
Good evening, Mayor, City Treasurer, staff, members of the public. Mayor, I like this presentation. Thank you very much for hosting it today. Subcommittee, I would appreciate if this could, was this on the website?
Yes.
It was on the website. I didn't see. I saw other policies that were included, but was this a chart there too?
Yes, it was in the agenda packet,
This
the
was,
presentations.
yeah, on the website. Okay, I just picked it up right now on the door. The thing that I'm concerned about, maybe I'm in the wrong section, the pension investment policy. As we all know, we're all having difficulties with our pension plan, with everything that's going on nationally. I'd like to bring it to the level where people can understand it. Where are we? Are we okay right now with our pension plan? Seeing that the market was up and down last week, worse than ever before, and some are pensioners. Some people are also retirees and in investing. So my thing is, can we bring it to the level where we can understand it in terms of more simple matters for the person that's being affected by this, especially at the national level and local. And the other thing that I'm concerned about is the capital assets policy and procedures. I had questions on this, on methods of disposition. I think I sent you an email. I'm concerned about some of this language, Mayor, and I don't know where to bring it up here or send you an email, which I did. I think some of these items need to be looked at and researched because it has a lot of, it gives a lot of the department heads and finance director and also the city treasurer opportunity to look in this in this items and not give the council and the taxpayer enough information so we can also be included. So I'd like more looking into it, maybe bring the city attorney involved in this. Thank you.
Thank you.
No other public comments.
Sounds good. And for the public commenters as well, thank you for those who forwarded questions in writing to staff. That's most helpful. Any comments from Treasurer Swearingen or motions?
No, only that in reviewing the investment policy, that's something that will come up very soon. Before you vote on the total budget, we're going to take a long look at that because of the situation nationally and federal, things like that. We also see that problem, and it does exist. And thank you for bringing that up so that we can look at it a little more in depth. There are questions, and we'll give you answers. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any comments at this time. And from my understanding, this is information only, and so no motion needed to recommend this as is.
That's
for
correct.
council. Sounds good. With that being said, we'll move on to the next item, which is item 4B, 25-26 financial and 4B, which is 2025 draft operating baseline budget. So back to you, Director Guillory.
Yes. Okay, so for this item, this is the fiscal year 2025-26 draft operating baseline budget. And we're also recommending that the Finance Subcommittee receive this report and provide any recommendations, if any. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. So the topics included in this presentation will include an overview of the budget development process, the draft operating baseline budget and how it was formulated, and the next steps in this process. Next slide. So the city goes through a pretty thorough budget development process each fiscal year. And it starts with the finance department using the current budget, which in this case is the fiscal year 2024-25, mid-year budget. We use that as the baseline and the starting point for the subsequent year's budget. Finance then creates what we call the baseline budget. So this is where we look at our ongoing revenues, match those up to ongoing expenditures, and determine if there is a gap that we'll need to fill or if the budget is balanced. So we take our ongoing revenues and expenditures that are in the current budget, we factor in known changes, we build in some assumptions in terms of growth rates for the various major categories of revenue and expenditures. And from there, we present those to the departments. Each department head and their staff looks at their budgets, determine if they will be recommending any changes to their budgets in terms of personnel or other expenditures at that time, and then they propose to us a budget for the upcoming year. We go through a series of budget review meetings, which includes all department heads, the city manager and finance director, and we review the budgets in detail. From there, the finance department works with the city manager to consider department requests for changes to the baseline budget, and we prepare what is called the preliminary proposed budget for the city council's consideration, and that'll be presented to the full city council on May 6th. Next slide. So this is the framework that we use to develop the budget. This is our structurally balanced budget policy. It applies to the general fund operating budget, so that includes our main general fund as well as the Measure S 2006 and 2014, and now the newly passed Measure I sales tax. Those are all together general funds. We create a proposed general fund operating budget that is structurally balanced according to the policy. And we really do that to ensure a fiscally sustainable budget, not only for the upcoming budget year, but also going forward when we're looking at our long-term strategic financial planning. And the goal is to have ongoing expenditures be fully funded by ongoing revenues. Next slide. So looking at the various budget components, recurring revenues are those that the city can reasonably expect to continue to receive on an annual basis over the next 5 to 10 years. And some examples includes our tax revenues, our fines, interest income, charges for services are some of the examples. Our recurring expenditures are ongoing costs that relates to an ongoing city service or activity. That includes our salaries and benefits, utilities, maintenance, and mandated agreements. An example of a mandated agreement will be the costs that we pay to the county for library and animal control services, for example. Next slide. So non-recurring budget items are not included in the baseline budget. So the budget that you will be looking at this afternoon is just baseline. It doesn't include any one-time initiatives or capital improvement projects. Non-recurring revenues are typically one-time receipts. That includes grant awards and one-time sales of property. Non-recurring expenditures are those related to activities that are not ongoing. That can include one-time council-directed initiatives, staff-recommended budget additions for special projects or expenditures related to grants, and also capital improvement projects are considered non-recurring after the completion of the project. Next slide. So starting with our general fund baseline budget, some of the highlights that I'd like to point out this afternoon is that the baseline budget revenue and expenditures are consistent with the prior forecast, and that means that it is status quo, and we're assuming consistent staffing and service levels from the prior fiscal year, so not recommending any major changes to staffing or service levels. It does include the new sales tax revenue, which is expected to generate approximately $2.6 million for Measure I. The city's baseline budget position at this point indicates a positive balance as ongoing revenues exceed ongoing expenditures in the budget forecast. However, there are several other operating funds that require general fund support, and they show negative balances. So we'll need to balance the budget with those in mind so that we can continue to provide our recreation services as well as our planning services. And one of our major expenditures, the non-discretionary expenditures that I wanted to point out as well, is our CalPERS contribution this is the city's contribution, is increasing by approximately $600,000 from the prior fiscal year. So this is one of those areas that we'll need to make up, and it's not a discretionary item, so it's one of those that we have to pay. So that'll take up a good portion of our additional revenue as well. Next slide. So looking at the numbers here, this is a summary of all general fund baseline revenue. And we can see that it's projected to increase 10%. So that's from 31 million up from 28.2 million in the prior fiscal year. But most of that is due to the new revenue for Measure I. And I'll go into the assumptions that we use to come up with the numbers in just a few slides. Next slide. So the next one is a summary of the general fund expenditures. And as I mentioned, if we look at the 2025-26 draft budget column, we do see that it's in a positive position of $1.45 million at this point. However, we do have some other areas to address through this budget. Next slide. So this is just a breakdown of where general fund money comes from. And as we can see from this pie chart here, approximately 82% of general fund revenues come from tax revenue, with property tax, sales tax, and our utility users tax being the largest categories. So the city, like many other public agencies, is highly reliant on its tax revenues to fund its operations. Next slide. So going into the various categories, I'm just going to go through the assumptions that we used. So property tax is imposed on real property and tangible personal property. There's a fixed statutory rate of 1% of assessed valuation, which is determined by Contra Costa County. And Pinole receives approximately 19% on the dollar for property tax. The fiscal year 2025-26 baseline budget assumes a 9% growth in our property tax, and this is mainly due to the retirement of the former redevelopment debt and the dissolution of the successor agency. So some of the property tax that was used to pay the debt service on former redevelopment properties has been paid off, and so that property tax revenue just runs directly into the general fund. There are some other components that are included in the property tax category that includes unsecured property tax, supplemental, and then the property transfer tax when a property changes from one owner to another. And for those, we just kept the growth rate flat, and that's just based on 3 years of history where it's fluctuated around those amounts, so we didn't make any changes there. Next slide. So here's just a breakdown of the property tax. And as I mentioned before, the city receives about 19 cents on the dollar for property tax transactions, and then also the amounts that we receive from the county. And the rest of it is distributed amongst the various agencies that you see here in the chart. Next slide. So our next big category of tax revenue is sales tax. Currently, the sales tax rate in Pinole is 10.25%, up from 9.75 when voters passed Measure I. The city receives the standard 1%, or what is known as the Bradley-Burns sales tax, plus we have our 3 district tax or local taxes. So that includes the half cent from Measure S 2006, half cent from Measure S 2014, and half cent from Measure I. The 25-26 baseline budget assumes a 2% increase, and this is based on the projections that we receive from our sales tax consultant, HDL. And then, as I mentioned before, the increase that we're seeing there overall in sales tax of 29%, that is just attributable to adding the new revenue to our sales tax. Next slide. And similarly, here's a breakdown for sales tax and how the 10.25 is broken down. So the city receives basically 2.5% when we add in the Bradley-Burns, the 2 Measure S's, and the Measure I. Next slide. Next is our utility users tax. This is an 8% tax levied on the consumption of telecommunications, gas, and electricity. We continue to see higher growth in the electricity segment, especially with rates as they continue to increase significantly. The baseline budget assumes a 3% increase, and this is based on past trends and what we're seeing in terms of the growth rates in the electricity segment. Now, some of that growth is offset by decreases in other segments, and so that is factored into the 3% growth rate. Next slide. So the franchise tax is levied on public utilities and corporations that supply gas, electricity, cable, and refuse. So this would include PG&E, Comcast, and Republic Services. The fees are paid by the various entities, and the percentages paid are mapped out in the franchise agreements that we have with the corporations. For the fiscal year 2025-26, this budget assumes no growth due to the substantial decrease in the cable segment, with many consumers moving away from traditional cable. So we are starting to see a significant decrease there. Next slide. The intergovernmental tax includes the motor vehicle in lieu fee, and it's levied and collected by the state. It's a tax on the ownership of registered motor vehicles. And for this budget, or the fiscal year 2025-26 baseline budget, we're assuming a 5% increase, and that's consistent with projections provided by HDL. This is also tied to the property tax projections. Next slide. The transient occupancy tax is a 10% tax levied on short-term lodging for 30 days or less, so the local hotels here. The 25-26 budget assumes a 13% decrease based on past trends. We continue to show a downward trend in short-term lodging within the city over the last 3 years, so we've built that into the budget. Next slide. The business license tax is assessed on all businesses doing business within city limits. For fiscal year 25-26, we're assuming a 2% increase, and that's based on past trends for the last 3 years. Next slide. Charges for services is mostly made up of the public safety charges, which are received for dispatch services provided to Hercules and San Pablo through cost-sharing agreements. And for fiscal year 25-26, we're assuming a 5% increase. This is based on the agreements that we have with the two agencies. Next slide. Permits consist of various permits, including sidewalk, grading, and encroachment permits. And we're assuming a 20% growth rate based on the last 3-year trends. And also we factored in the increase in the master fee schedule of 2.7%, which is based on CPI. We are continuing to see consistent growth in encroachment permits. Next slide. Fees consist of various fees mostly related to permits, including rental inspections, technology, administrative fees, abatement, and code enforcement fees. For fiscal year 25-26, we're assuming a reduction of 4% due to a projected decrease in code enforcement fees, and that is also consistent with past trends. Next slide. And then other revenue is made up of all other sources of revenue, including fines, interest income, grants, and other miscellaneous revenue that the city receives. We're assuming a decrease of 21%, and this is mostly due to the decrease in interest income based on market conditions and some projections with where that's going in terms of investments. And also when the city has less cash or less idle cash to invest, we see less interest income there as well. So we factored that in. Next slide. For transfers in, this comes in from the Section 115 pension trust, and the goal is to offset the increase in pension costs in the general fund. In 2024-25, the city did make a one-time transfer from the general reserve to balance the budget. We're now projecting to do the same thing in the next fiscal year. So overall, in this category, we see a decrease of 22%, just based on that one-time transfer for the last fiscal year. Next slide. So on the flip side, looking at where the general fund money goes or how it's spent, this is a breakdown of the major categories of expenditures. And we see from here that about 61% of the budget goes towards salaries and wages and benefits, and then the third largest category is professional services. Important to note that the majority of our professional services costs are related to the contract that we have with Contra Costa County Fire Protection District. So that's around $6 million of the total 8.9 that we see here in the pie chart is related to that contract. Next slide. For salaries and wages, the budget includes the current staffing level of 117 full-time equivalents. So we are not assuming any changes to staffing for fiscal year 25-26. The budget also, at this point, includes a 2% growth rate, and this is just to capture the natural increases in salary expenditures, primarily for those staff that are not at the top of the salary range for their job classification. So it accounts for step increases. However, it does not include any cost of living adjustments at this point. Next slide. Benefits includes our retirement and other benefits such as medical, dental, workers' compensation. The budget does assume a 11% growth rate overall in the general fund, with the highest growth in the PERS contribution, as I mentioned earlier. And then also we're seeing significant increase in the medical rates and also in our other post-employment benefits, or OPEB, which is also known as retiree medical. Next slide. The professional services category includes consulting and administrative services, building and equipment maintenance, office expenses, and others. As I mentioned before, it also includes other contracts with other governmental agencies, including ComFire and also the county animal and library services. And we're assuming a net 7% growth rate just based on cost escalation, and that is built into those contracts with those entities. Next slide. Other operating is mainly our utilities, so our water, electricity and power, and cable utility services. We're assuming 17% growth rate based on past trends, and mostly the significant increases in PG&E rates. Next slide. Materials and supplies includes fuel, maintenance supplies, and safety equipment. And the 25-26 budget assumes no growth. And again, that's just based on past trends. And then also departments entering lower budgets for some of these items. So we did recognize some savings in some areas too. Next slide. Interdepartmental charges include administrative charges and reimbursements for services provided by one city department to another, and our general liability insurance. So an example of an interdepartmental charge would be the HR or finance departments charging their costs out to other city departments. This baseline budget includes a net 17% decrease due to lower reimbursements to the general fund from other non-general funds, and also a higher general liability premiums for the upcoming fiscal year. Next slide. Capital outlay includes non-major asset acquisition and improvements, such as computer equipment and furniture. This is not included in our capital improvement plan. So these are daily operational costs for smaller pieces of equipment like computers and furniture. We're assuming a 28% increase just based on cost estimates. Next slide. And debt service includes the payment of principal and interest on the 2006 pension obligation bonds, which goes through fiscal year 2035-36. And the amount budgeted is based on the long-term debt obligation schedule. Next slide. The transfers out category includes transfers to other funds as operating subsidies. So from the general fund to the recreation fund, Pinole Community Television, or PCTV, to support their operations, as those operations are not able to recover 100% of their costs. And so they receive a subsidy from the general fund, which is the transfer out. For fiscal year 25-26, the budget assumes a 32% decrease due to reduced transfers to the capital improvement funds. Next slide. So looking at the other operating funds, this slide is a summary of the recreation fund. And I mentioned before that the general fund does provide a subsidy to recreation to be able to continue to provide the various recreation programs to the community, especially our seniors and Tiny Tots and other programs. For the fiscal year 2025-26, if we look at the draft budget column, the third column there, we see that right now there is a shortfall of $1.068 million in the recreation fund. Next slide. For the building and planning fund, this fund is able to recover 100% of costs for the building division, but not for the planning division, which is standard across agencies. And so while the general fund has not been providing an operating subsidy in the form of a transfer out in the budget, we would like to address that going forward so that we make sure that we are accounting for that operating need for the planning division. So at this point, the fund is showing a shortfall of $711,000, and that is, again, mainly attributable to the planning division. Next slide. For Pinole Community Television, this is another operating fund that receives a general fund subsidy, and at this point, the shortfall is $73,000. And again, it's just not able to recover costs, all of its costs for the services it provides. Next slide. And then the Sewer Enterprise Fund is the last major operating fund. This fund is completely self-sufficient, so it receives charges for services in addition to cost sharing with the City of Hercules for the treatment portion of the collection or treatment portion of the wastewater treatment plant. And there you see what looks like a deficit of $24.9 million. But what we did there is captured all of the capital improvement projects over the next 5 years and front-loaded those. And so that $24 or $25 million will be covered by fund balance. So that's funds that have been accumulated in the fund over the years. So that the fund is fully self-sustaining. Next slide. So in conclusion, the fiscal year 2025-26 draft general fund baseline budget does currently show a positive balance of approximately $1.5 million. However, the other operating funds, which depends on subsidies from the general funds, indicate a total shortfall of approximately $1.9 million. So staff is exploring a number of options as we go through this budget development process to try to offset some of these expenditures to reduce the need for the general fund support. Now, we probably won't be able to find $1 million to do so. However, we are looking at ways to reduce that amount. So we are actively pursuing grant opportunities. We're looking at sponsorship opportunities and just ways to also bring in some additional revenue. And that, oh, I'm sorry, one more slide there. So next steps would be to take any recommendations that the Finance Subcommittee may have this afternoon. We'll present those to the City Council along with the fiscal year 2025-26 preliminary proposed operating and capital budget on May 6th. And then also the City Council will be holding a special meeting or budget workshop on May 13th. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I'll bring it to Treasurer Swearingen first for questions.
So did you want to do the public first?
Well, we can do questions for the board first, and we'll do public comment right after. Comments, yes.
Would you please turn your mic on, Treasurer? Your mic. Thank you.
The 115 fund transfer,
Yes.
we seem to be dipping into that on a regular basis. And I still look out front about 5, 6, 7 years with the pension costs. And I don't know if that's been accounted for because those costs seem to vary in the plus direction and seem to go higher than anticipated every year. And it says, of course, and this has been commented on already, that it's going to be replaced. From where, I don't know. I don't see it in the budget as a way to replace the money that's in there, and I don't think we have a sufficient amount. We do right now, we have a sufficient amount, but I don't think down the road we're going to have a sufficient amount. I don't think we're going to be able to replace it. That's just my comment on that. Or my question is, we're doing question, okay, affirmative question. A phrase is, where is this replacement money going to come from, if there is any?
Do you mean for the general reserve? Not for the pension trust, right?
Pension trust fund,
Though we didn't,
we're not going to replace that, is that correct?
no. So we're not including or any contributions to the pension trust, no. We are still using the funding from when the fund was set up.
Well, what I see is that that number being reduced, it was anticipated at a certain level.
Yes,
And if we reduce it, the state's out of money on pensions, and they're going to steal it from the cities. And the way they get it is through increasing that pension fund. And they've been out of money for quite some time, and they're going down every year. They're taking out more out of that pension fund and stealing it for their budget. And the only way to balance that at the state level is to enhance the cost to the city for their pensions. And that's where it's going to come from. And we've known that for several years. So my question is, I think we should be awfully careful as to taking money out of that fund, and then a year or two from now, you're going to see a significant decrease in the pension fund money available. That's all. That's the question on that. The PERS contribution, well, that's what I was looking at, was the PERS contribution. The 7% growth rate, on professional services. It seems just a little bit high to me, but is it always that way?
it depends. So the contract that we have with fire, built into our contract, there's a 5% escalator just based on that. So that's that's one of them. That's one part.
That tells me where it's.
Yeah, but our animal control services has gone up significantly. Library services, I don't think is going up this time. But yeah, those are the larger components.
Well, the only question I have on that is, we better look into paying twice for library services. So that's the only question I have on that. I think we're paying 2 times for the same service.
And then if I may, oh, I'm sorry, did you have another question before I go back to the 115 trust?
No, go ahead and go back to that.
Okay, I just wanted to respond to that. So with the last long-term financial forecast that we had, it did show that we would fully exhaust that fund by fiscal year 2029-30. So only have a few more years to go, and we do need to address that, and that's something that Kelsey and I have, or City Manager Young and I have been discussing for a while as one of those areas that we need to start looking at now in terms of our long-term strategic planning. So that is one that's at the top of the list, because we will get to a point where that's $3 million that we won't have to replace that cost going forward. So we are looking at that.
Okay. That's all I have right now.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to let Mayor Pro Tem get settled in real quick and ask a few questions here. So if folks go to page 3 of the report, you'll see on table 1, folks will see an approximate $1.4 million net surplus. Can you dive into that a little bit deeper and explain to the public? From what I'm seeing, it's not a surplus in a traditional sense. And so can you sort of explain that for folks?
So it is, it's just right now it's the amount of revenues over expenditures. And a portion of that is because we have the $2.6 million for Measure I. So imagine if we did not have that, it would be a different situation or picture here. And so what that means is it's a surplus if we're just looking at the general fund, but the general fund supports other operating areas. So, and we still have $1.9 million shortfalls in our other three operating funds, as I mentioned. So if we were to add those together, we are looking at a $500,000 shortfall, essentially, right now at this point, because we would need to backfill those amounts. Otherwise, those funds go negative and we still have the same problem.
Gotcha.
Does that answer your question?
It does. So
Okay.
that's what it looks like right now, but further
Okay.
down the line, it will be a different story and different numbers.
Yes, because we would like to balance everything out. So a part of balancing the general fund means balancing those other funds.
Thank you for that explanation.
You're welcome.
One thing I want to dive into here is the slide on the recreation fund. We'll just start going down that list there.
Okay.
What are the biggest cost drivers here? I did a lot of numbers on the sheet.
Yeah, there it is.
Points it out, please.
So just like any fund, the main costs are the personnel costs. And then the third largest category would be professional services. But also if we're comparing the recreation fund, and we can even go back a few years, there hasn't been many changes organizationally to the recreation fund since fiscal year 22-23, when the department was set up as its own department. So there was a citywide organizational restructure. You probably recall that. So since that point, there hasn't been any major changes in recreation in terms of staffing and everything. So a lot of this is just natural growth in personnel costs, including retirement, step increases, things like that. And then again, even if we're looking at the professional services, is not increasing by much. But at the same time, the revenues aren't enough to keep up with the growth in the expenditures. So that's probably the core issue, is we're just not able to recover the majority of those costs.
Gotcha.
Through the mayor, don't we have a significant cost built in there for repairs to the swimming pool this year? Is that correct?
Not in this budget.
Next budget?
So we have a small amount added to, well, small, it's about 300,000 as a potential project in the CIP that we'll be bringing back. With the recreation fund, a couple things to note is revenue is actually increasing. Expenditures are also increasing, and that will continue to happen as services are provided. But the capital improvements are not in the actual recreation fund, they're in the CIP.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Grants, a negative 100% change there. And I think just across the board, dive into that a little bit more so we can grasp how that was calculated and projected for this upcoming year.
So that was a grant that the Recreation Department received for several years, but learned that it's no longer able to qualify. So that was a tobacco grant.
Tobacco grant.
Yes, that it no longer qualifies for. But as I mentioned, with Director Dwyer, along with the city manager and myself, we are actively looking for grants and sponsorships for the community, as well as reviewing all of the fees.
Okay, thank you for that. And then grants across the board, I saw a percentage reduction. I'm trying to find it here in the report. Do you recall that number?
Citywide?
Citywide.
No, it's not called. It's actually included in other revenues if we're looking at the general fund, just because it's a small amount. So it's not broken out as a category. Now, if you'd like to see that, because those are important, we could pull those out too.
Gotcha. It's under other revenues.
Yes, it's included in
Lumped
that
in
number.
with the, remind me here. Other miscellaneous revenue.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Can I provide some additional information on that? There's a couple different ways that you can structure the budget in regards to grants. One is with potential anticipated grants, and putting those numbers in there. We chose not to do that for this particular budget because we want to be able to see exactly where we are. with the idea that as that additional grant revenue does come in, which we anticipate it will do, that'll be something that you'll see possibly at mid-year or in the future. So it's not that we're not anticipating there to be grant revenue, it's that since we haven't had that grant revenue approved yet, we don't want to include it into the budget until we're absolutely certain.
Gotcha. So it sounds like we're playing on the safe and more generous side here. And you mentioned mid-year. Do we have, so just the grants have different times when we'll be aware of when we actually receive those funds. And it's closer to mid-year is what you're saying? Or it could be past that?
It could be past that as well. Grants and donations and other sponsorships come in at various times. And until we're starting to see a more consistent track record of how much grant revenue we're bringing in, we're trying to be, as you put it, more conservative and cautious with
Gotcha.
reporting those numbers.
Thank you. And then the next slide there, which is the building and planning fund, also want to ask there what are the main cost drivers. Is it also personnel for this one?
Yes, it is. There's, in professional services is another area, so staff augmentation for various planning and building services as well, that's included there. But also important to note that a good portion of those expenditures also include expenditures related to grants that the Community Development Department has received, and those are budgeted.
Gotcha. Right, I'll pass it to Mayor Pro Tem for any questions at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, and I apologize, everybody, for being late to the meeting, but I do have some questions. I was able to get through the packet and got an understanding of what was presented here, just going over everything. I wanted to ask just some broad questions as to, with the presentation, it didn't seem that there was any recommendations for changes in the policy. Is that because we're moving into the fiscal year and there's an expectation that we would be focused more on mid-year review? Or to me, it just seemed that there's a structural deficit of, I believe, $500,000 or so, right? And with that deficit, we would be going in, pulling from the reserve to balance for the fiscal year, and then moving into the new fiscal year, we would be looking at optimizing. Is that the way I understand it? I'm just trying to understand, there wasn't any recommendations in the...
There aren't any recommendations yet because we wanted to bring the baseline to the subcommittee
Very good.
in order for you to provide any recommendations, but we will also be providing recommendations on May 6th.
Great.
And the recommendations is the proposed.
Pardon?
The recommendations is the proposed budget when it comes back, I guess.
Absolutely, exactly. But we wanted to make sure to present to you the full picture first and hear your thoughts before we presented any recommendations.
I see. So we're really looking at more the next fiscal year where big decisions are going to need to be made between now and then. Whereas 500,000 with the, I'm guessing, about $40 million budget, right? Is that still the same total?
Let's see.
Total budget?
If we're just looking, oh, you mean total or just general fund?
Yeah, I'm looking at what percentage are we off, right? And is that an acceptable level of error? 500,000 seems to be very low considering the larger budget. And so that's kind of leading into the question is that, are we looking at savings in the aggregate throughout the year to our mid-year?
You're asking.
Yeah.
So we've already gone through and sharpened our pencils and cut the majority of the things that we could cut without cutting services to the community or anything along those lines. There are some additional potential recommendations, ways that we would move things. We are probably going to, if you all are interested in this, recommend or show you some different models of what would happen should we decide to lower our reserves and instead actually put that money in our 115, and so that we are increasing our revenue for that and being able to build that up over the next few years with the idea that could still be pulled out for reserves. But all of those are recommendations that after hearing from you in this subcommittee, we would come back and try to provide in the presentation on May 6th.
Great. Has there been any discussion, and I know that this is a hard discussion because animal control services was brought up just in conversation, but I wanted to mention like the library, animal control. There are things that we pay the county for services, and I'm just going to use a random number. This isn't real number, but could be $250,000 for animal control that goes to the county for those services. Has there been any thought about what it looks like to move some of those in-house for cost savings? We mentioned IT, I think, was another element for savings. What is the balance there? And then I guess I know hiring takes quite a bit of time for the interviews and whatnot. Where do you see the plan going? Is there savings there?
So I'm so glad you asked that. So IT, we are bringing in-house, and there will be a savings there once we get past the transition piece. So over the year, there will be a savings. Planning, we are also bringing in-house because we've been outsourcing with professional services there as well. And there will be it will actually cost about the same, but service level will increase.
I see.
At the same cost. Animal services, that is one that I believe would be very challenging for us to bring back in-house, but we have discussed that. And if that was something that council wanted us to pursue looking into, we'd be happy to do that. Just would require building out additional services that right now we have no expertise, facilities, or anything else for.
Right. I mean, I bring that up as an example, but I'm just trying to understand how much we're paying into a system, what we're getting back, and then what is the delta between that, and is that the appropriate or not appropriate, but the right use of that money, and is there another way? I know that with the wastewater committee, we had talked briefly, there's several things that could be done. It was just not having a person there to drive those projects, right? And that was one of the things that we talked about on our 101. I'm just wondering, 500,000 seems to me like it's achievable to get there. How does the Measure I play into that? And then really, what timing I know this might have been talked about already, but what is the timing where Measure I becomes, we're going to need a next step or another revenue stream, or, you know what I mean? Because it seems like we're chasing a dollar amount, and it's not something new. I think most cities are doing that. But time-wise, where will we realize the gains from the moving IT in and doing all those small cuts that everybody took?
So I think we should be looking for additional revenue sources starting now.
Okay.
And I think we should be reviewing options. There's been some strategies already looked at, and that council has already looked at, and our finance director has already been reviewing. But I think there's probably opportunity for us to look at additional revenue. The economy is in a challenging place right now. We will most likely be able to tighten our belts and hold on for the next 2 years. And then about 2 years from now, I think we'll need to make a decision on either ways that we can, based on where the economy is at, ways that we can be looking at increased revenue, or are there other services that we would want maybe another agency to take over for us?
I see. Okay. And then I know that the debt financing model was briefly, there are other ways to reduce our annual costs as well, right?
Yes.
And so I guess is that all being presented this round, or are we looking to balance and then get into the next 6 months with those other models?
So we're looking to balance. There will be some recommendations, including some increased revenue discussions in this budget. And then most likely, there will be some additional discussions at mid-year.
Okay. I mean, I know that we've talked a lot about the different modes, like the public-private partnerships. We talked about debt financing. At our retreat, we had a really good session about throwing out a lot of different ideas to get there. I think, and this is something that's been on my mind, is what we're really talking about is sequencing, right?
Yes.
Like, what is the cadence and what's the sequence? Which is probably the harder task than coming up with all these great ideas on how to get there. But we're trying to understand what's the time frame you and the team need to understand that sequencing, and then the overall benefits. And I know it's not over a 1-year period; it's going to be over a 3 and 5 year period. But I just want to make sure that the steps we take now lead into that sequencing, and that we, because a misstep could hurt us in the end, or could hurt us in the 3 to 5 year horizon. What does that time frame look like? How many steps are we really talking about? Could you give us some insight on that?
Sure, and thank you for that very, very thoughtful question, too. So I would say that this next year is going to help us develop that larger plan. And ideally, over the next 6 months, we're going to at least have, a 70-80% plan fleshed out that we can continue to share with council. Part of what that also is going to entail is we're going to be bringing up our CIP presentation in just a few minutes. In that CIP, right now, we have a lot of projects, more than we can actually accomplish. But what we wanted to do is hear from you all your priorities, and then hear from the council the priorities of those specific CIP projects, so that then we can come back during the workshop and by our final council approval of the budget with that CIP program finalized, with something that would be attainable both with staff capacity and financially sustainable. So some of this, I think, is going to be, we're hoping to have a little bit more of a collaborative budget process this particular time around than maybe has occurred for a little while, with the idea that that will help us continue to strategize as we're moving forward.
Got it. Okay. And then I know in the past, this process, and maybe Treasurer Swearingen, you could chime in, there's been this effort to line the budget up annually while maintaining a larger reserve. Has there been a point that you're aware of where the reserve was there, or there was a significant, outside of redevelopment, right, where that was a significant amount of money? That sequencing, as you know, is really important. Has there been an element or any kind of, I want to say, hazard, landmine, or anything that you see when developing this process? Because I know it's based on time. I'm just trying to understand, back then, did you see any of those coming, and is there anything we should be looking at the budget now? Because I think we have it pretty well balanced currently, but now we have the levers to pull to get there. And I know that you've been on those previous councils. Is there anything that we should be looking for?
Through the mayor.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had to develop that because the reserve, we had always had a reserve process in this city, and we had a pretty good sized reserve. And when we hit the downturn in 2008, the recession, that just wiped us out because none of our costs went down and everything else went up, and we couldn't afford it. So between 2003 and 2008, the reserve continuously was depleted until it was gone. And one of our goals in 2008, when we got back on, was we had to do this, that to balance the budget. We were severe, as you well know, very severe with what we had to do, and we were operating on a shoestring. So as soon as we lost redevelopment, that caused another crash in what was kind of a reserve. As you say, we could transfer funds from there into other places that could be used as redevelopment reasons for doing it. We did that. And then redevelopment went away in 2011, and we managed to survive that. And we did it with as you know, like you did it with the sales tax and other things to try to get back on track. Well, as soon as we did that, we realized that we're in bad shape. I mean, we're paying day to day. We were having to borrow money for payroll. And so when we finally got back to an even basis, we started putting money aside for reserve. And we determined that on what we felt the need for reserve would be compared to what other cities normally have in their reserve funds. We tried to maintain a reserve that was comparable in percentage-wise to our size of city compared to other cities around. And that's where the reserve number has come from. And that's what we were trying to maintain all the way through, is that reserve, because that is the balance between catastrophe, emergency, whatever. That's the balance in saving us from bankruptcy. And that's why we went there.
And
That's why the numbers were set.
And I appreciate that, because I wanted to ask another question about the interest that's made on the reserve and the interest that's made on the pension trust, because that money has also been growing over time, and then how that's being used. Because I do remember, I think it was a couple years back, we took that interest to try to make sure that we can get to market, to make sure we keep the keep our employees and stay competitive in the market. I'm just trying to understand, with that interest, if we were to move to the pension trust, a portion of that reserve, does that increase that interest? Does that allow us to bring stuff in-house? And I'm not saying that this is all something that is like we're going to do or the council is interested in doing, but I'm trying to understand, those are those levers that we're trying to pull while still protecting a level of that reserve. And then what exposure, if we do put it in the trust, what exposure do we have once we were to, possibly lower the not the pension trust, but the general fund reserve?
No, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, I'm
Pro
sorry.
Tem. And no, I mean, you can continue on, but Treasurer Spurgeon, too, I think during that time when you sort of rebuilt that reserve balance and determined 50% was the amount. You mentioned that other jurisdictions also had a 50%. So the comparable cities had that percentage amount at the time?
That we did a comparison survey of the cities in Contra Costa County, and then we did a comparison survey also of cities our size around the state, because we felt that the costs are pretty level around the state as to what it takes to run a city. And so we basically based it on our size, population size, and the needs of cities similar to us, and what their reserves were. And we also knew what our reserve had been in the past before it went down. And we realized how long it took it to go down. It took 5 years, and then it was gone. But it was dipped into every year. So if you start dipping into it this year and next year and the year after, you're not going to be able to put it back if you hit a recession, or if you hit something like that. You're just not going to be able to put it back. So that's why it's fairly important to try to keep that reserve at that level. Now, you could transfer some of the 115 funds into that fund if you felt that the city could survive a 115 crash, where the state, as I said earlier, where the state decides, well, we're going to have to take it from the cities because we don't have it anymore, so we're going to get it from the cities. If that were to happen, that could be fairly significant. And that 115 fund is based on that principle, because we were told by people from the state agencies, the PERS Association says, you're going to pay for this as a city, and it's just the way it's going to be. Sorry, see you later. So we can't stop them from increasing those rates. We can complain, and we could file a claim or whatever that it's exorbitant, but
It's the way it's tracking. Yeah.
so that's what all that's based on. So you don't have a lot of manipulation there. You can try some of it, and you don't need to do it now. You're talking to maybe, as the city manager mentioned, a couple of years down the road, we can look at it again and see if it's increased to the point where we feel we're going to be safe in borrowing from that fund and still have enough to maintain. So,
Yeah.
but that's not something you have to deal with this year, I don't think.
Right. No, I appreciate that, Mayor. I know you and I have talked a lot about that sequencing and really what that burn down rate looks like, because there is a point of no return, right? You can get past the point where now you're way into the budget or way into the pension, you can't, or that trust fund, the pension trust and the general fund reserve, to a point where now you're reliant on it. And I know we don't want to hit that point. One question, I guess, is when they did the survey, was it a dollar amount or a percentage of the budget? Because right now, the policy is at 50%
50%.
of our general budget, where we're finding I'm sorry, 50% of
Total
the
general fund expenditures.
total general fund. Sorry. We're finding that number is considerably lower for other cities, almost half. And so the question becomes, was it a dollar amount or a percentage that was set? And 50% is to the rest of the city, or to the rest of the community or the larger cities, seems to be very comfortable and very bulletproof, really, if something were to happen, which is a great place to be in, but it also isn't making that much more into or feeding that much more into the future because it's hindering services, right? So I guess that's the balance that we're talking about moving into the next phase of this, right, is what those scenarios might look like.
Right, and on item 4A, we went over the financial investment policies.
Okay.
One thing that Director Guillory had mentioned is that the average is about 25% for cities of our size around the area.
Yes.
And then we requested that they bring more information in the
Okay.
when the policy comes back to council
Great.
for review. And I think El Cerrito is the only one that has a higher one, I think 28%. I might be wrong about that, but
Okay.
yeah, just something to, I think, review when it comes back to council.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions before we bring the public comment? All right, City Clerk, any comments?
Yes, thank you. Irma Ruport in person, and then Rafael Menez online.
Thank you again, and I want to thank you all for that discussion, including City Treasurer Swearengin and former mayor and council member. I was here when the recession hit. It was bad. You remember those days. And one thing I do want to remind, and I think Mr. Swearengin remembers, the city manager prepared 2 budgets, one in case we're in trouble and one in case we were going with the status quo and doing okay, just to make sure that we can fall on something back in case something happens. Yes, we're in trouble now, guys. It's not a year, not 2 years later. We're heading to a recession if we're not in one now. Grants, they're asking for grants to be returned or not being used. Salaries and sales revenues going downhill. The tariffs are outrageous. The stores, there are a lot of items, they're empty shelves. Mayor and council, let me just say this. Let's not wait till it's too late. I disagree with information being withheld. I think it's important that we send it out to the public now, how it is. And if this report looks as good as we think it is, how about a week, 2 weeks later, or maybe a month? Update it, make sure we get true figures, true reality, because there's no one to blame but us here. All of us. It's gonna hurt. All of us. City staff, everybody's gonna hurt. The taxpayers. So I just want to make sure that all contracts that we have in this city, look them over. Look them over. Make sure we're getting what we get, what we're getting. Animal control, yes, I do believe we need to look at that contract. There's a lot of things I can add to that too, because I have pets at home, and as a matter of fact, they're in trouble. I'm fixing most of my animals. But getting back to the real information, mayor and council and staff and public, please get on the ball. Give us that information. Don't hold back. If you're hosting meetings, put it out in the public, and do not withhold any time, anything, information, a budget, because we all need to be on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rafael Menez.
Good afternoon again. I have a few questions on this item. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. So first off, on page number 80 of the agenda packet, it mentions that there's basically some values shifted around for the building and planning fund, but that overall, the shortfalls attributed to the fund not being able to recover the full cost of providing planning services. Is that primarily due to, as was discussed in the fee study a few years back, simply the city choosing to discount some planning rates? Or due to projects falling through, or some other reason, like why is the city not able to fully recover its planning costs? Secondly, on, let's see, where was it? Page number 99 of the agenda packet, the presentation where it was discussing the franchise tax. I'm assuming that's not including any adjustments for the new agreement with Republic Services because that hasn't actually been passed yet. And then thirdly, on page number 110 of the agenda packet, it says that medical rates, basically other benefits, which I'm assuming is primarily medical, increased by 10%. And I think previously we were predicting a 5% rate of increase there. So is it possible to provide some more detail on why the rate is increasing at that level and whether the city thinks the rate will continue to increase at that level going forward? And let's see. And I think that was all of my questions and comments on the baseline budget. I had a question about whether or not some things were accounted for already, but the responses to the mayor's questions already addressed that. Thank you.
Any other public comments, City Clerk?
There are no more public comments.
Thank you. We'll bring it back to any comments at the
So,
board.
so I just kind of want to ask, what's our credit rating currently?
So there's not a current one. The only time that it's set is if we're going out for debt financing. But for the last issuance, if I'm not, actually, I don't want to speak off the top of my head. I would have to
Okay.
look and see what it was. It was a high rating, of course, but I can't remember exactly.
Okay, because I know that we have, part of our policy was not to fall below the triple B minus rating. Like, so I saw that that's pretty low. Like, I mean, I think we should raise
It
that.
wasn't even, yeah, it wasn't
as a-
even
as a
close to that. But
standard.
as I mentioned, they usually set those if we're going out for debt financing.
Okay, 'cause I think one of the things that I'm kind of going over is what is a long-term investment for Pinole, right? And what are we willing to look at our long-term assets? Like we've talked about roads, and we've talked about our new revenue coming in. And if we know that we're historically going to be receiving, just going to throw a number, $300,000 a year from now until forever, right, with steady increases, I'm just wondering, does debt financing make sense for those long-term assets, right? So buildings, for example, building maintenance, large-scale 20-year assets, like how are we looking at those, and are we basically, it's my understanding, the time that I've been here, is that it's been a run to fail. Basically we're going to run this car into the ground, and then versus, paying for a new car, and planning on the next 5 years and making a payment on that car with low risk of it failing on us. That's kind of the model that I'm seeing us kind of formulate, and we're in a really good position to do that. Has that all been identified as to what our debt financing options could be? And if we know that we're going to conservatively get, we might get 500,000 one year, but we're conservatively going to get 300,000 from, I don't know, a fund source like the gas tax or whatever it is. Can we comfortably say that a debt financing option might reduce our payment to 250, right? Versus us spending the $300,000 and still not accomplishing our goals.
Tying into those particular funds.
Right, and kind of locking that number in. I know that with the Measure I might take what, this is why I'm a fan of the 2/3, is because you know what budget you're working with for that particular item. But just trying to get some insight for the public and to go on record, because I know that I have a feeling other council members are going to look at, is that a possibility for reducing our overall operating costs year on year?
So that is something that I think we're going to be able to have a much better handle on, and we'd like to work with council on reviewing that over the next 6 months. And the reason why I would say that is because in looking at this current budget, we really are having to use almost everything that we have. Now, I have to commend staff and council for some of the past years on setting aside certain amounts so that we actually have some money to start doing some larger projects. So I think we'll start seeing that over the next year. But one of the things that we're also going to be looking at are some of the potential revenue coming in from Measure I and where that needs to go, as well as revenue from some of our contracts and some of the other pieces that we're looking at. We're not going to have all of those numbers fully even validated, I would say, until probably around the time that this budget is set. Once that occurs, though, that is when I think looking at debt financing is going to make sense, because while I don't think it would make it cheaper in the short term, we could, by using debt financing, leverage those payments over a longer term and do larger projects all at once that would both be cheaper than by having economies of scale, and also we all know that prices are going to continue to go up.
Right.
So I think it is definitely something that council will probably want to review once we have some of these numbers a little bit more validated.
Got it. Okay. I mean, I think for us, we definitely have to look at recommendations coming back for the reserve policy. I want to be careful as to what that number looks like. I know that we went to 42%, I think, last year to cover, it was the 5 officers. I think that we had 2 in those positions that we were looking for public safety. But that's one thing I think we have to look at what that policy is going to be, how that money's being used, and then can that money also be set aside for leveraging and kind of baselining some of our costs. This is just my thoughts. I thought I'd throw a few of these out just so that we're in the meeting when we get back. I know that was one thing that we've talked about before. The other, obviously, our debt policy would have to coincide with how, how we're the debt financing conversation, which seems like we're not really there yet. But having a new, and I mean, this is the hard part, is all these are all interwoven together. So I guess how that would work out is really what I'm trying to see when we come to the budget cycle, is that, hey, this budget, yes, we're going to be augmenting $500,000 from somewhere, right? But really that long-term plan has to kind of be somewhat incorporated into that. And the capital plan, I know that we're going to be getting to that here shortly, but, and maybe this discussion's better after the capital plan so that we could start to see, is there money there that can also be incorporated in the debt financing to leverage this out further, balance our budget, allow us to accrue the Measure I money, and then go into our next fiscal year stronger than we were this year. It's just me thinking about it and trying to put the pieces.
No, it's a curious thing. It all comes in different sort of seasons, right?
Right.
We're at this place, same meeting last year. We're talking about, okay, we need to raise revenues, and then we went towards putting the measure on the ballot for half-cent sales tax, waiting on that to pass. Voters have passed it. Now we're here and sort of like, okay, how do we really make the most of it? So,
Can I mention one other item, Mayor? The bond, we just talked about bond financing in a different bond vehicle that was, I think, last meeting regarding housing, right? I know that there are other vehicles out there through bond. I'm just wondering, has that been explored simultaneously? I mean, I'm not a bond fan, but I know that there's different ways to structure the bond so that it's directly benefiting, like that money's directly benefiting the community. Has that been explored, or is that an option as well? And how much does that further complicate the effort?
So we have discussed that particular piece. Right now, we can totally bring that back to council for further exploration as well. If we can do debt financing focused on the amount that we already have, then that would be another way to make sure that we know exactly how much everything is going to cost and not put any additional costs on our community, just using what we already have. Looking at additional bonds, there's a possibility to definitely achieve more. I think it would be something for council to also look at the timing where our economy is a little bit rocky, and the way that even the bonds are set up right now are also, their future is a little uncertain as well. And so I think that would be something that's definitely worth exploring, but that we should do very strategically and thoughtfully.
Great. Any other comments from the committee at this point? Any recommendations for this report?
I think for me, those were the ones that I think are standing out to me. The pension investment policy, I think we're going to have to, I know that some of the, if we were to augment that, and I know that there was an article, I think a couple weeks ago, about the CalPERS system and billions of dollars being lost and all this stuff was kind of, I don't know if that was just a news article that says, hey, we've been losing billions and we want everyone to know that, hey, be ready, right? But it did kind of perk my ears up just to wait a minute, how is this going to affect our pension and the pension trusts, and how's it going to affect our employees? I'm wondering if we were to supplement that, I guess maybe we'll need to have that kind of analysis done as to, can we put more money in there, earn more interest to cover the payment for it? Is that the safer bet? Is it, hey, let's go operations and then, risk the pension drawdown, right, to a point of where the interest isn't helping us anymore? I'm just trying to understand, okay, with all of that, that's another one interwoven into the into the other two policies that we mentioned. So I'm just hoping that those scenarios are kind of built out by staff and brought back to council, because I think this is going to be tricky. The other ones, I mean, the assets policy, I think we all know that's above 5,000. Not sure if that's something that the $5,000 mark helps us or hurts us, and what that, the planning for that goes on. I just think back about the lease buyback for vehicles. Is that even going to work, right? And does that save us money long term? But do we really need to own all of these vehicles? And is that the cost benefit there? But I'm just wondering, should that go up? Should that go down? I don't know. The $5,000 for the capitalizing assets.
So capitalizing assets, 5,000 is pretty standard. Mm-hmm. That is also the safest level to typically have that. I personally prefer 25,000 because it creates less staff time. But for us to go to that level, I'm not sure is something that we necessarily need to do or would make too much of a change right now.
Okay. And it affects the cash that we have too, right, on hand?
No.
I guess, for example, if I have a spending limit of $5,000 or $4,999 and a piece of equipment breaks that's $4,500, I would be able to replace that if it's not capitalized, right?
Actually, it's a different type of threshold that we have with different policies.
Okay. We talked about purchasing policies too. I would imagine that's all getting incorporated, right? The Bidwell, Sourcewell, all the...
Oh, having cooperatives?
Yeah.
Yes, and that's already something that we're utilizing and will continue to utilize and hopefully increase that utilization because it does help with staff time.
Great. I think that's all. I mean, we got to get through capital too. I'm sure that's coming.
May I
Thank you
just-
for that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please
May
go
I?
ahead.
I just wanted to comment on transferring money into the pension trust. Just wanted to make this point. So if we're looking at the investment instruments that we have in the general reserve versus the pension trust is very different. The pension trust is set for longer term instruments, meaning that we leverage more interest income on those, as opposed to our general reserve where we have more shorter term instruments like CDs, for example, right? It makes it, and they're both very liquid. Like we could pull money from either if we needed to. They just will sell off the instruments. But because of the amount of the funds that are in the trust and for the longer period of time, they're able to invest those in longer term instruments. So we're seeing a higher rate of interest income in the Section 115. So, for example, if we did want to bring down the general reserve and transfer some funds over into the Section 115 trust to expand the life of the trust, we would see some additional gains in the form of interest income, which would increase the amount of the funds that are in that trust.
Got it. And then, can I ask one more thing? Knowing that we have that considerable amount of reserve, doesn't that give us a lot more leverage of negotiating interests if we were to do debt financing as well? Or is it pretty standard?
Actually, it's backwards.
So having cash on hand doesn't allow you to negotiate better for interest?
Because we have a reserve at such a high level, we technically have to keep it at that high level, which makes us Actually, I'm going to turn it over to Director Guillory on the terminology, but it actually makes it more of a liability when we look at debt financing.
Okay. So that means that changing that puts more cash in the general fund that allows you to negotiate interest rates. Okay, got it.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. No chicken and egg.
This
Nice.
was very.
Okay.
Yeah. If there's no more comments, this was a great preliminary discussion just to flesh out these ideas and get some answers. And looking forward to this coming back to full council for review.
Thank you.
And thank you for the presentation, Director Guillory. Appreciate it. And we'll see you at the next council meeting. That being said, we're going to go to item 4C, which is our fiscal year 25-26 draft 5-year capital improvement plan. So I'll pass it over to Director El Guindi. Welcome. And did I pronounce your last name correctly? El Guindi?
Hiba El Guindi.
El Guindi. Apologies.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I will go through our 5-year CIP with summary informations, and I will be happy to provide any details depending on the information needed. The 5-year capital improvement plan extends from fiscal year 25-26 through 29-30. It's funded by various funding sources, including measure funds, enterprise fees, grants, SB1 and gas tax funds. The cost estimates that we have from year 2 to year 5 could be changed in the future as we progress with the various projects, with the main focus on the fiscal year 25-26 budget for the various projects. The draft 5-year CIP currently has 50 projects, including 3 new projects and 9 new annual projects or programs. We kept all projects for your review and considerations. so that you would be able to prioritize and provide us with your feedback and to meet the available staff resources in what we can accomplish. The project categories cover facilities, parks, sewer, stormwater, streets and roads, and infrastructure assessments. The three, next slide, please. Next slide, please. The three new projects include the upgrade of the 2 city pools. The maintenance cost for a few years now has been relatively high, and there is a need for investments in upgrades of the pumps, for examples, and other equipments and amenities. And this project has a funding request that's proposed of $350,000. The second project is for the design and construction of the EV charging infrastructure, as well as the zero-emission vehicles. The total cost of this project is slightly over $1 million. It's $1,070,000, mostly funded by the Climate Implementation Grant, with only $118,000 of local match for the first 2 fiscal years. The third project is really a planning document for updating the ADA transition plan. The plan that we currently have was developed and approved in 2004. Most of the recommendations contained in the plan are no longer applicable. They have changed over time. And also the state and federal standards have changed a number of times since 2004. The proposed budget for this update is $250,000. Although I should mention that we are going to pursue a federal Safe Streets for All grant for the development of complete street design guidelines, as well as the update of the transition plan. And if such grant is awarded, then the funding proposed here could be used for local match. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, there are several new proposed projects, the annual programs. One of them is for upgrading our city parks with a proposed budget starting with $200,000 per year. And that would be for upgrading the playground equipments, for furnishing, installation of arts, landscaping, the various improvements that we are in need of within our parks. The second project shown on this slide is upgrades of our stormwater system. And we've divided it up over the 5-year span of the CIP with an annual proposed budget of $150,000. There is a requirement for the installation of trash captures, which we are behind. So this would be included in such upgrade. Also, smaller scale projects, like for example, Dolores Court has been experiencing flooding for a number of years now. The connection between the courts and the creek would be covered under this project. Next slide, please. This is also a new program for the establishment of traffic calming within our residential neighborhoods. We will start actually by updating our traffic calming policy, which would be considered by City Council within the next few months, whether this annual program ends up being approved or not. There is a need for updating the policy. The proposed funding annually, which would be about $200,000, and that would allow us to perform the data collection and analysis, the design and construction of traffic calming plans, including physical devices like traffic circles, bulb outs, center medians, and such. The following proposed project is annually would be a safety projects, safe routes to school, for improvements in signing, pavement markings. For example, we were at the Pinole Middle School earlier today, was our chief of police, and we were asked to establish a new crosswalk across Man Drive, equipped with an RRFP. Such cost would be covered under this annual program, the review, design, and implementation. This is in addition also for educational material that will be developed in addition to the physical infrastructure. Next slide, please. Back in 2007, the state set requirements of all jurisdictions to meet a level of retroreflectivity for signage and pavement markings, and we're quite behind. And this could potentially be a safety and liability matter. So this annual project, starting with a budget of $100,000 per year, would tackle this issue, and we would gradually replace our signs and upgrade our pavement markings. The following project would be for the upgrades of our street lights. The city owns over 500 lights, which is about 1/3 of the total, with over 900 owned by PG&E. But what we have out there does not meet the standards. There are locations with no street lights. The spacing between the lights is not a standard, the level of illumination. So there are a lot of upgrades that we need to tackle gradually to establish a sense of safety and security within our city and meet the standards. Next slide, please. The next project would be to upgrade our traffic control signals with a proposed budget of $200,000 per year. And the type of upgrades that we would tackle is, for example, pedestrian countdown signals, the installation of push buttons that are to standard and other ADA compliance type improvements, upgrade of the controllers, and eventually, but that's not initial, it wouldn't be a priority, but update of the software, having remote monitoring of our traffic signals and the ability to change timing and such in case of an emergency or construction work. So this program would be established for that purpose so that we can gradually upgrade our traffic control signals. The next project would be for ADA upgrades and installation of curb ramps with an annual budget of $150,000 per year. The second one is for upgrades of our sidewalks. The state law requires property owners to maintain and upgrade the sidewalks fronting their properties. We would start by establishing a programs that would be brought forward for City Council consideration for sidewalk replacement and upgrades. And this project with an annual proposed budget of $200,000 would be to assist the property owners with the upgrades citywide, with probably provision for low-income property owners. And I should mention, although it's not a new annual program per se, but it has a significant change to it, is the pavement rehabilitation program. And the first year funding for this program, and that would be the more comprehensive work, like slurry seal, cape seal, full reconstruction, and the reinstatement of the pavement marking. That's what would be covered under this project. It's not one of the slides, but thank you for trying to get it. And the first year funding that's being proposed is $2,250,000, and that would be funded by Measure J, as well as the SB1 and gas tax funds. Following years that are being proposed currently, and we will try to upgrade our roadway network as soon as possible. That's why it extends over the second year through the fourth year. It doesn't go as far as the end of the 5-year period, with the annual proposed budget of $5 million in the second year, $5 million in the third year, and $3 million in the fourth year. And the proposal here is to use vehicle impact fees and debt finance, which you may wish to discuss further also with input from our city manager. Next slide, please. With that, this slide takes us through the approval process of our 5-year CIP. With the subcommittee consideration today and input. The special budget workshop is scheduled on May 13. I will also be taking with David the 5-year program to the Planning Commission on May 19th. The preliminary consideration by City Council, I believe it's on June 3rd, not in May, with the final proposed CIP with all the revisions on June 17 for council consideration. Next slide, please. The 5-year, and I apologize if the slide is not very readable. It has a lot of information. The 5-year CIP accumulates to $59 million, with the first year proposed budget of $13,693,000 of the various funding sources, including measure funds, gas tax, enterprise fees, and grants. With that, next slide, please. I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much for your presentation. We'll go with Mayor Pro Tem first for questions.
Sure. Thank you for that presentation. I think with the 5-year plan, I mean, it's looking like there's a $60 million need over the next 5 years. 20 million of that, or 20.5 million, is really waste. You have it on the 500 fund, sewer enterprise fund. Is that number split between us and Hercules, or is this our portion of that of that number?
For the capital improvements, yes, it's split between us and Hercules.
I guess, is this 41 million or like total, or 20.5? I guess just for Pinole's half, or is it?
This is the total.
Oh, sweet. So it's like 10.25
Yes,
ish.
ish.
Got it. With that, how many people are doing project management for the sewer for this $20.5 million worth of work?
Following your input at the wastewater subcommittee, we did discuss it internally, and there is a proposal of an engineer that would be fully funded by the enterprise fees and fully dedicated for the sewer projects.
And that's reflected in the earlier budget?
No, not yet. So, I mean, it is in the budget, but it's not yet. It will be in a recommendation that we bring on May 6th.
Okay, so that $500,000 that has been balanced may go up by another body if, no?
No, because that 500,000 is actually coming from the other departments. This is an enterprise fund. It would be fully covered by that particular enterprise fund.
Very good. Okay, so let's talk about the other 40 million that we're proposing over the next 5 years. The vehicle impact fees and department finance shows 26, 27, that money kicking in of about $4 million. Excuse me.
If I may clarify that, that would be anticipated if we were to go out for debt financing, and that would be bringing debt financing back in a larger amount. So that would only occur on those particular years should council decide to approve us moving forward with debt financing. Otherwise, we would probably have about 1.3 million in that particular line item.
Okay. So I guess this budget is reflective of a combination of our revenue and a debt financing option. Okay. Well, I guess in the previous conversation, we said that debt financing was still being explored. Is that still the case, or is this particular item already?
So this is part of the exploration, and that is one of the reasons why we wanted to bring this forward, is to sort of gauge your interest
Yeah.
in this and gauge the subcommittee's interest in us exploring this further and bringing it forward to the full council or deciding to hold this piece back.
Okay.
And if I may add that that financing option is only assumed for the pavement rehabilitation project. That's for the level of need that we have throughout the city and the amount of upgrades that we need to carry out.
So will that bring us to par, or is that going? I guess we know we have several deficiencies, and then some of these deficiencies, as you mentioned in the presentation, are a liability to the city. This looks like about $10 million over a course of 3 years. Is that going to bring us to a serviceable level? Is it going to bring us to, or kind of eliminate the liabilities, but still have the remainder? I'm trying to understand, if we were to do debt financing, how far did we move the needle?
The assumption here is slightly over 15 million over the 4-year period.
Right.
It's not going to revamp every single street. If we look at the report and the PCIs throughout the city, the identified needs actually is close to 60 million. With that being said, the 15 million will take us a long way. In addition to the work that we will be doing in-house in terms of repairs and potholing and such.
Okay. So this will get us to an operating state where we would be able to maintain at least, it sounds like if it's a $60 million need, that's pretty much 25% boost that we would get off of the debt financing. Do we know the term of the finance?
So we would be looking at probably about a 20-year term, possibly less, depending on how much we want to take out and at what time.
Okay.
I would also say, even though it would only tackle around 25% to the community, especially with Director Elgindi's expertise, I think it would probably feel to the community closer to 50%.
Okay.
Yes, I would like to clarify one thing about the report, because it was also done a number of years ago. And it assumes based on the technical evaluation.
Right.
But there are ways of improving conditions. Like instead of, we recently tried in another jurisdiction, for example, a type 3 slurry followed by a type 2 that extends the life of the pavement by at least 5 years. So there are ways of going about it that wouldn't cost as much as it's shown in the report.
Right, and I wish there was a better way to quantify that without doing another presentation specifically on this, but, so we're saying that the $60 million overall need, this 15 million or 25% really may touch 50% or 40% of the roads that are currently out there, bringing that level up. So there is a significant like synergy from this $15 million investment that'll lead into further life cycle for maybe larger amount of roads, right?
Yes.
Are there other opportunities like this? I'm thinking the lighting, and is that the same theory that we're going off of? Is it how do we, kind of increase those enhancements significantly with the investment?
I think there's definitely other opportunities with the facilities in general, and Director Elgindi has some amazing additional strategic ideas.
Yeah.
I would recommend really focusing in just a few key areas this year, especially with the limited staff time. We never fully answered your question, but right now, especially her engineering team is extremely limited, so she will actually be having to tackle a lot of these projects herself. So I think it's very critical that until we are in a place that we can provide additional support, that we be as strategic as possible on determining which projects are council's priorities.
Great. I noticed that, and I mean, Mayor, please stop me if taking up. Okay. I noticed that we had on our standards and specifications that we're referencing the county, and the county standards is probably why we're leading into several of the, maybe 300 feet for one light and then 200 feet for another light, et cetera, right? Is there, and I mean, this is another layer of work, but is there a way to work to standardize some of that so that when we have developments in Pinole, or I know that we've been doing it kind of case by case, which gives our developments these different looks, but standardizing some of the public right-of-way stuff.
Yes, and that's part of the reason why we would like to develop complete street design guidelines, and we're applying for the grant for it.
Mm-hmm.
If we do not get awarded, we will still tackle the standards. You're absolutely correct. We need, so that it would facilitate also whether it's a capital project review process or development project review. It would facilitate the decision making and would be consistent throughout the city. The spacing between the street lights is also a factor of the street width and the level of illumination. That there is analysis that goes with it. But I did check the county's guidelines, and we do need to update ours in light of the state standards as well.
Got it. Is there, and I mean, these are all questions I'm asking that I'm hoping that when we get to the council meeting, like the big one for that roads, the financing, I think it's very important that we make that distinction that the dollars being spent are there isn't a synergistic effect there. It's not just a direct one-to-one, that the city is actually going to see a lot more benefit than what we're outlining just one-to-one with the cost and then the financing, right? With the lighting, I know that there's, just like the roads, this level of sporadic, it's not like one, area. It's pretty much throughout the whole city. What's I guess, where was that money coming out of? Was that part of the financing portion? or-
We used to have local street projects that was combined under the pavement rehab, and then I used the funding for all the other programs. And I will be happy to share with you. So the source of this funding is from the arterial street rehabilitation.
377?
Yes, and for annual budget of 250,000 for the first 2 years, and then 200,000 the following 3 years.
So I don't know I'm just thinking for the public and for, the investment that we're going to be making. It's hard for somebody to see. I mean, for me, I think I could see it a little bit better than most, but just because we've been up here for a while. But I think it's hard for the public to see $560,960 without that's equivalent to X amount of lights, right? With the understanding that that's not the lights that we're going to get, right? The light is increasing in cost from year to year. So that number goes down from year to year. So we just kind of, this is where we realistically see our goals. And I know that's not an easy task, but I'm just wondering if it's possible to kind of put that in perspective for the public, or is that kind of setting a goal that may not be achievable, or I don't know how to communicate that, but I know that when I talk to people, I'm trying to, just citizens in Pinole, it's like, well, guys, look, this is how our staff is trying to tackle this. This is what it means if we were to, buy a brand new car, right? You're going to make payments on that car, but hopefully, you're reducing your risk. I'm trying to put that in perspective so people can see it. In the next presentation, I know that Director Guillory gave us that dollar, right? That shows like, this is where your tax money is, like something simple people can refer to so that they know, okay, hey, we got this tax measure off the ground. This is what we can expect. And this is how we hold all of ourselves accountable to that number. And then kind of track, right? Because nothing ever goes perfect, ever, in anything, right? But just, where that is, I think that's helpful and reduces a lot of the questions, right? Because we're kind of setting goals. I don't even know if we're at that point to say that we can do that, but I guess maybe just as we're going through this, that's kind of in the
If
the
I
back
may
of your mind.
clarify, and unless we identify a specific area that we would start with, it would be hard to provide this number. What we know is each street light is about $15,000, correct?
Right.
But it depends on the photometric analysis, the width of the roadway, how many we would be placing, like this, the spacing between the street lights, we wouldn't be able to come up with an actual estimate. And with that, I don't know what we have under the ground, whether
Right.
we need to replace the conduits or not, whether we have electricity sources nearby or not.
Director,
So it's an actual estimate for specific areas or specific locations.
I
That's
don't-
why.
Yeah, I hear you. I just don't think actual is obtainable, right? Like, we're not going to get actual numbers. But I think that it's important, and I know that's hard for a public agency to set a number, because everybody's going to say, well, we're going to do 100 lights, but you did 99, right? And then, like, we know that number is an estimate. I think that everybody can agree that numbers are going to be estimates when you're looking this far out over a 5-year period. 10-year period is even further, like, out there. I think anybody that's looking at this would understand that. I think that we're trying to understand from a decision point, is 100 lights achievable, right? Or this, the SMART goals, specific, measurable, was it achievable? I forgot the R, and then time, right? Like, I mean, it's just one of those things where we could communicate to the community that, hey, this is where we think we'll be by doing this. Is that
Yes.
just something to think about?
Could I actually bring it back to the subcommittee and ask your recommendations on this particular project? This is one that we hear from the community.
Right.
I know you all hear it extensively. It's one that we want to tackle, and it's one that it's going to take a lot of work on even doing the legwork on finding out those answers.
Right.
So I almost wonder if you would recommend us maybe having a smaller amount on developing a strategy this year, and with the idea that we would do a larger amount next year, so that we could come back with being able to provide that information for the community, because a lot of this, I think, is going to be a little bit of trial and error, because a lot of this hasn't happened for multiple years.
Right. I mean, I'm okay with the plan, the
Okay.
overarching plan. Like, I think that from my stance, I get it. Where it gets hard is communicating that overarching plan to somebody who only has, a minute to talk, and really something I could refer to, hey, this is what the plan will look like. This is where we expect to be, and this is how we're tracking, right? And I know that that's usually in a normal environment, that's about 2 people, 3 people doing that work, and we only have 1. But I just want to see kind of what's achievable in that range, because it's a large investment. And as we were saying earlier, or as I was saying earlier, can't really afford to make, mistakes. And if we do make a mistake, we got to catch it really quick, fix it, or stop, right? And not burn more money. So I'm just trying to understand, how do we communicate that? How do we know it's working, right? Just as a community and as a council, and hold ourselves accountable to it. The other one that I had asked about, or that I was wondering about, was the ADA access. I know that that's one that was pending. I mean,
Could I make a comment on what you were just talking about?
yeah, I feel like I'm being the only one talking.
Through my life. Through the mayor, if you would. I take a little, I guess I'm not really supportive of this particular project, and I'll tell you why. Because I'm going to do that. Several years ago, PG&E came to us and said, we're going to put new lights. We'd like to put new lights all over the city, fix you all up, and you're going to have less cost, energy savings, less cost. Now we can't see anymore because those lights go like this, where the other lights went like this. So now we're going to have to add lights in between the lights that we have now. So now, where's your energy cost savings go? It's right back to, we're going to spend that money to try to light things that aren't lit anymore. So PG&E asked us to do that. We reluctantly agreed to it. But the energy savings thing was, everybody, yeah, we're going to save energy. And now we're going to pay to use more energy because we're going to have to put in more lights. That's my comment.
Can I, Mayor, and maybe that's a question to staff, I know that the PG&E has programs supplying, energy efficiency, and I know that we're a member of MCE. Are there other avenues? Because I do remember that PG&E effort, and they went through and it was like, oh, we're going to do all of these lights, and they did one on my block, and it sure was brighter, but to your point, it was just one circle of the court, right? And I guess, is there a way, or what I know there are vehicles that PG&E have. They have financing vehicles. They have MCE, I know, has a few programs. But again, I guess that gets back to the point. It takes work. to get those answers, right, in time.
They used to have more programs. It's mostly LED focused for replacement. And the photometric analysis that I was referring to, that's exactly what you're referring to. And that's the cone of illumination. And what I was referring to are standards, not PG&E practice, but standard installation of lighting based on the assessment. So the spacing is going to be based on the type of lighting and luminaire and the assessment that would be associated with that type of lighting.
Can I ask a question? Is it going to be the 500 or the 900 that we would be working on? Remember the 500 that we own and then 900 that...
We would, yes, I'm sorry. We would be working only on the city lights.
Great, okay.
There are areas that are missing. Most of the PG&E are actually installed on utility poles, and they're not at the appropriate spacing. So we may be adding in some areas.
That makes sense, because there was complaints a few years back, I think, right, because some people were like, why are my lights better than... Well, yeah, they're two different owners, right? I mean, okay, got it. The other question I had was the ADA improvements and then expectations around the funding. Is that the same funding, 377 account, arterial?
The ADA ramps is from funding 325, the city street improvements.
Okay.
And that used to be a combined project between curb ramps and sidewalks, but these are two different types of improvements. And property owners would have no responsibility towards the curb ramps. That was part of the reasons that the projects were split up under their function.
And then the STEM fees are still the bridge? I think there was money for the bridge and then Pinole crossing.
The San
rail.
Pablo Bridge?
Yeah,
Yes.
1.5, and then I think there's additional 70 and 80,000 the following years. That was the grant? Is that the same?
The San Pablo Bridge is still ongoing. We're working on it, and it's part of the CIP.
Right, is that the 325 fund? I remember us getting a grant for that, and then there was considerable amount of money for design.
Which project is this?
The San Pablo Bridge, but I know that WICTAC also gave us money
Yes.
for the crossing, that rail crossing by the sewer plant. Remember that project, I think? Yes.
Oh, yes, I think it's on here as well.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, it's part of the CIP, and you're correct. We have a little over $2 million remaining for completing the BE phase, which is the environmental review. We're expecting to complete the CEQA and NEPA by the end of the federal fiscal year, by October, with the remainder of the fund would be for the design.
Okay. I'm just feeling like we're gonna need more staff, and what that's gonna look like. I mean, and how these funds are all pulled together. I mean, especially if we're gonna try to get this over a 5-year period. I don't know, has there been I know that you talked earlier about the sewer plant, but it just seems to me like it's gonna be very difficult to get through.
Well, through the mirror, are you talking about the total construction?
Well, yeah, when you look at the total need,
Yeah.
there's a significant amount of upfront work that has to happen in order for us to even get to construction.
Well, Caltrans has put definite amount of money aside for the construction, as you know.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking about in total, right?
That's what I'm talking about in total.
Not just the bridge.
No.
I'm talking about.
Oh, you're talking about more?
I
I don't know about the other stuff. I know the bridge has got money.
No, the bridge has money. What I'm saying is accounts 100 through 500. There's a considerable. I mean, just year one is about 13.6 million. That just has to get just to keep things going, right? And I'm just thinking to myself, what does that look like? And I mean, how does that get, I mean, is there a need for supplement? I don't know if there's,
I would say it's very unlikely that we would be able to do all of these projects with our current staff level.
okay,
So, which is one of the reasons we wanted to bring forward and ask for priorities.
right?
Where we currently are with that $500,000 deficit, that does not include cost of living allowances. That's maybe negotiated and discussed over the next few months as well. And it also does not include any additional staffing that we would bring on if that was
Right.
determined to be a need.
So out of these funds, if you're not bringing staff, was the intent to, like for the lighting project, hire RFP, a contractor to pull the plan together? I guess that's what, I mean, right. Because we ran into this at the sewer committee. We had all of this money, all of the need, but nobody to manage the project. And so it wasn't that we couldn't do it. It wasn't that we didn't have enough money to do it. It was just frankly, we didn't have a body there to push the project. And I'm concerned is that, you know, over the course of the time on my time on council, there has been money allocated to projects, and then there's been the expectation, even in some cases, that these projects were moving, and there was really nobody moving those projects, you know, or there was limited projects moving because it's just we hit capacity. I'm wondering if the intent isn't to present new staff, how are we supplementing that to get to, like, for the lighting? Is there a lighting company you would call or RFP out, get the bid to create a lighting plan, or a lighting replacement plan, and then implement that plan by RFP into a contractor to do capacity of X amount of dollars? What was the strategy, I guess?
I understand what you're saying. It's sort of like the way this manifests is year after year of having these 5-year CIPs. We're just seeing these fully funded projects deferred to next year,
Right,
And then how do you?
And it's through no one, like, you know, one could say, oh, well, you didn't do it. Well, no, it was just you couldn't. Like, there wasn't a physical ability to do it.
Right.
And then that also begs the question, okay, if we were to scale back into the city manager's point, where do we prioritize what to scale back in order to support the movement of these other projects? I'm just wondering, was the strategy to contract and then basically sub those functions out?
We did discuss the possibility of having an additional engineer to be able to do more in-house. The reason this is not coming forward is because of the financial condition of the city. For the project of street lighting, for example, we have the technical expertise to do the assessment in-house and the design and just contract out the actual construction. However, this is going to be dependent on what else we have to do. So we may be forced to contract out even the design.
And that's where I think the effectiveness of this money starts to go down, right? Because we're going to, okay. And I guess that's where if we'll be looking, I know I'll be looking to staff to try to understand, okay, if that's the strategy for this year, then that realistic number of how many lights we can do, how many, you know what I mean, needs to be reset, right? Because if it was something that was brought in-house, and this is the best part about those efforts, is that you get a max and min, right? You understand, okay, this is, if everything goes right, this is how many we can do. If everything goes wrong, this is how many we can do. But without having the staff to create those max and mins, you're kind of stuck. Or we're and decision-wise, we're kind of stuck.
So based on our level of staffing, what we would love to hear, and based on, you know, the conversations that were had in the retreat, the conversations that we're hearing from the community, we would, in our workshop on May 13th and also even on May 6th, what we would really love to hear from council and from the community members that are working with you is if we could only tackle half of these projects. Which ones would you like to see us tackle this year? With the idea that those other ones won't go away, but they will be pushed to the next year. And that way it's understood that when we're communicating out to the community that this is what we can handle in our current staffing level. Should the economy turn around, should we be able to find these additional revenue sources, then we could start bringing on additional staff members and take on more of these projects.
I know for me, I would say that anything roads and lighting related is big for capital. I mean, that was something that resonated really well in our retreat. I know the mayor and I have talked about that a lot. Those are things that I think that we'd like to see happen. I would just say that what the hard part too is that the exploratory funding, right? So if there's opportunities that pop up, is there a bucket we can pull from to say, hey, we can do this report on, I know we did one a while back, I think, the Treasurer Swearingen, you were on that committee as well, where we talked about, we're on that board too, on the council too, when we talked about signage, and just wayfinding in the city. That was a report that we had money for to explore. So there's already some work already done there, but those kind of reports inform the 3 years, fast forward 3 years to now, where it's like, okay, well, what about signage, right? Is there a way to also incorporate money, if we were to scale back, prioritize, to also have a number in there to make sure that we're still doing the homework for stuff coming 3 years from now, 2 years from now, et cetera?
That's a pretty complex question.
I'm asking. I'm prepared to start to scale back this capital plan to be very surgical on what we want to get done. I'm in favor of that. That's just me talking, as Councilmember Tate, right? And one vote on the council too. But I'm prepared to do that. But I don't want us to not keep looking at or have funding to make sure that we're looking at doing the types of reports that will inform the next decision. And I guess that all pulls back to what is the strategy and cadence and timeline for those decisions that we need to make. That's just my opinion looking at this, and I think I've talked a lot, but I'll stop.
Well, that's what the meeting is for.
Yeah. No, I mean,
you're good.
like, so I really want to understand, and then also have the time to route some of this through Planning Commission, because what are they seeing that we might not be seeing correctly? And really just have the city kind of, okay, these are the things we're going to focus on, especially since a lot of this is being funded through the new Measure I tax. I think whenever we run a tax, our public very clearly said what they want, right? And I think I'm prepared to start pulling the budget into exactly what that vote was. But I just want to make sure that as council members, as we're going to these conferences, as we're starting to hear how things are starting to progress, just statewide, or what are other communities hearing, I want to be able to, as a council, have those discussions, have the funding to execute a report on, pervious pavement, right, or pavers, or how a road is being, whatever new thing is out there. And I want to be able to have that to feed into the following years. And a lot of times it might just be a report that sits, that everybody read, council goes on record with that report, but quickly we can refer back to that report if a grant falls out of the sky, or if something becomes very, very hot, or, in a city.
I think that's something that we could potentially add in. I think it would also come back to sort of looking at, again, council's priorities, because even those reports do take staff time as well.
Right.
So just something to consider.
Yeah, and I mean, that's part of this scale down.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, I mean, that's what I got for now. But
Sounds good. I'm going to keep my questions brief. I'll bring it to you right after. because I want to get to public comments as well if there are any, and then come back to council for comments, committee comments. First question I have about the actual CIP document, the draft we have. Usually we have a list of the projects, and then we have an unfunded list of the unfunded projects. Will that be coming back to council in the next iteration of this document?
Yes, it will, and I thought that was part of the packets. I apologize if it wasn't.
No worries. I don't see it here, but it'd be useful to have that come back
Yes,
when it comes back to council
yes.
for review. And then my second question is just diving into these individual projects here. The Plum Street parking lot project. This is the improvements for the parking lot that houses some law enforcement vehicles. How much has been spent on that project so far? Has there been any funds spent?
There hasn't been any work done since the assessment was done last year. This project could possibly be pushed depending on the priorities that you would be sharing with us. But no work has been done since last year.
Gotcha. And the assessment, do you remember just the cost or just an estimate of how much that was?
I
And
think
if not,
we'd
it's
have
okay,
to
we can
get
come
that
back to it.
back to you.
Thank you.
Yes, I may have to.
No worries. I want to also ask about the senior center parking lot. I think it's the auxiliary parking lot by senior center, FA 1901. Has there been any funds spent on that project in particular?
And
this
no,
point?
and
None,
and
okay.
we rescheduled it into the future.
Gotcha. Okay. For the mural preservation project, PA 2402, I know there's mention of community involvement as part of that project. It's showing $100,000 for that particular project. What does that consist of? Is it just sort of like an RFP we put out and then we find a contractor who specializes in rehabilitation of artwork, and is it just in one particular space, or is it mural preservation for the entirety of the existing public art we have in Pinole?
Are we referring to the Safe Routes to Schools?
Oh no, this is
project,
the
or which one?
mural preservation. It's project
Oh,
PA.
that has been, yes, that has been on the CIP for some time, and we talked about the different options.
And the amount budgeted, the $100,000, is that mostly the materials involved for community involvement, or is it more a professional contractor coming in and doing that work?
So mural preservation itself is typically pretty technical, so it would probably be an outside contractor coming in if we were to do the actual mural preservation, which is different than public art or bringing in additional murals.
Gotcha. Okay. And it's just for this one particular project by the West Cat bus stop on Oak Ridge?
Actually, the way it's worded, it has more than one mural, and there may be potential for community contribution as well that we could possibly pursue.
Gotcha. Thank you for that information. And then just looking here, well, more of a comment. Well, I'll save it for when I come back. I'll bring it to you, Treasurer, for any questions you might have about CIP and the report.
No, I think everything is pretty much covered in here. The thing that concerns me more is, and it's comments basically, because I don't have a lot of questions, but I'm going to make a couple of comments, and I'll do my comments now because I do have to leave shortly. I would recommend that the city council look at exactly what council member Vice Mayor, oh, you're moving up. What Vice Mayor Tave has suggested and recommended is that we put as much money as we can into the roads and streets and lights. I think this is critical for the community. I think we hold back some of the traffic calming projects and maybe use that money in roadways rather than traffic calming. I don't think we need to start changing our roads from 4 lanes to 2 lanes or from this to that or whatever, because we haven't got roads now. And we need the roads fixed before we start going to the next step. So that would be my recommendation for that. state skateboard park, we built it, and it's a little too close to the creek. And this is going to be an ongoing project. In case you don't know, every 3 or 4 years, we're going to be out there doing a project to fix the skateboard park because there isn't enough underlayment there to keep it there. So that's going to be an ongoing project. You can do it now or do it later. Relocate road and on elevators. Oh, and I would also like in some of these instances where I think we have doing slurring and overlayments, I would recommend street repair totally if possible, and I know we're not budgeted for that, but our guys are doing a wonderful job. Our public works people are out there, and they've got the equipment, they can do a great job, but they can't do enough, and they're not even coming close. And so when you're just fixing ruts here, there, and the other place, what happens 6 months later, enough cars go over it, and they turn it up anyway, and we're right back to having a rut again. So I would recommend doing full pavement repair in some of those places that are really bad now, as we did on Doige Avenue, which is so far holding up. But we did a complete road repair. And so I would recommend that we try to do that in some instances where I think just an overlayment is just not gonna hold up. So that's what I see on that. I see most of these projects are unfunded, or a lot of these projects are unfunded, like the senior center parking lot. And that's been funded, and now it's unfunded. So it's been sitting there for, I don't know, what, 6, 7 years or more?
Yeah.
And we got the house off of it. We did that, and we got in there and we graded it all out and left a big hole. And so now we're doing maintenance and upkeep, and it doesn't look like that, which is actually kind of an important item for the senior center, will get done. So that's something I would recommend that we try to find some funding for someplace. And that's the extent of I don't have any other questions as far as the report. I think it's a good report, and thank you very much. It certainly is enlightenment, and especially for the citizens, that if they have an opportunity to read this report, they'll understand why their street isn't getting fixed. So I think that from that standpoint, thank you very much for coming on board and putting this together in a short amount of time you had to do it, but you had some excellent help, I'm sure. So that's all I have.
Thank you for the comments. Appreciate it. I see we have 2 cards there. City Clerk, do we have a couple public comments on this item?
Yes, we do. We have Irma Report in person. We also have Rafael Menez online.
Good evening again, everybody. Thank you very much. I was just reading last year's April 18, 2024 Subcommittee report. Public Works Director Sanjay Mishra. He has a lot of projects that you might look it up, some of the things that are coming up, especially that San Pablo Avenue Bridge project was supposed to show up in this fiscal year and would mostly involve funding from the Federal Highway Bridge Program. And once a preliminary design was complete, the city would apply for funds for fiscal year 25-26. And yes, he had a priority list. Everything we're going through right now, he started it last year. He had a priority list of all the projects, the streets, the slurries, everything. So you might want to look into doing a little bit of more homework on that, because he left a lot of things not completed, but he does have reports. And he did a priority. He prioritized items, what we need, what we don't need. A lot of these things, I do agree, are extra things we wants and not needs. What we need to look at, yes, potholes, the streets, the lights, yes, liability is there. Last month, I think we rented a machine for $26,000 to help with the slurry seal. And I was going to question that as to why we can't put a budget and buy one, since we're going to do slurry sealing every year at every road, because the roads are really a mess. and we have to seal them. So I'm just asking, maybe it's worth buying one than renting one every time you need one. That was just 1 month. And I do believe that, that in my opinion, I think prioritizing the list, we don't need extra stuff. I agree with City Treasurer Swearingen regarding some of the things of the painting and all that. No. Come on, guys. Let's not waste any money. Taxpayers want to know where our money's going to, and make sure that we prioritize that list like Sanjay did last year. This was last year's recommendations and reporting, so maybe we need to go back to some of his lists and priorities. And thank you all very much for all this. I think it's helpful, but as a taxpayer, we need complete information and no excuses about not having enough staffing. And to hire someone to come in just because we need someone to paint the streets, I don't think so. I think we need either temporarily hire somebody or make sure that we have people here that can do the jobs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rafael Menace.
Good afternoon again. Mayor Pro Tem, Mayor, Treasurer, staff, and public. My name is Rafael Menace, a resident of Pinole, and I've got a few questions and comments on this item. First off, on page number 127 of the packet, the vehicle impact fees, and it's written as DPT finance rather than DEBT finance, and I interpreted that as basically being something that the Department of Finance would go into rather than a debt financing item. So if that could be corrected in the future drafts of this item, I note that it's properly done on the slide for the item itself, but it's worth noting. And I'd also encourage that a slide be made for the presentation going over the roadways, the particular details of the debt financing associated with that, because that's a substantial cost that I don't believe is currently allocated. Let's see. On page number 173, IN 2301, the Facilities and Real Estate Master Plan, I know that it doesn't have a priority score and it doesn't have a history, status, or impact if delayed. I think given the fiscal challenges the city is likely to face, I think we should at the very least note the impact of delaying this, meaning that the city doesn't have a full understanding of its assets and the actions it could take to deal with fiscal harms if they actually occur. Let's see. On page number 175, IN 2103, recycled water feasibility, it seems to be calling for a feasibility study. And I sent this question in writing, I think. Yes. Didn't the city already do a feasibility study for this item? And it basically found, the contractor said basically there wasn't going to be enough space in the water pollution control plant to install the necessary infrastructure, just given the limitations of the site. I don't have the exact study that was on. And then finally on page number 148, SS2402 Pinion-2 sewer capacity. I know that it's only getting started at financial year 2028-29. I'm wondering whether there's going to be any impact on the Pinion-1 sewer project that's been ongoing currently, given that, you know, it's basically going to be dead ending midway down Pinion. Is there going to be any issues with basically the interlink between the two areas? And finally, for my conclusion, I'd like to request, both for this item and also just as a more general policy point, that the mayor at least ask staff for feedback on questions and comments for the public before moving on to council questions and comments, because for the last item in particular, I noticed that public feedback was basically just skipped over in favor of council feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. There were a lot of questions there. I'm not sure if Director, you captured all of that, but City Manager, would it be possible just to follow up on that at a later time? Would it be best, or?
We can follow up with that at a later time, or if you would like us to answer any of them, we can answer some of them now.
Sure. If you captured any and feel comfortable.
I could try to tackle some of them. I just would like to clarify that the priorities that Sanjay established in past years were reviewed and taken into consideration. Unfortunately, he was not able to implement everything simply because of resources, whether it's financial resources or staff resources. but they were reviewed. Pavement marking and signage, these are actually state requirements that were established back in 2007 and were quite behind, that could impact us negatively. With regards to, and please forgive me if I missed any of the comments, I'll be happy to go back. With regards, for example, to the project on page 175, yes, there was an assessment carried out in the past. The reason it doesn't have a lot of details here, because we are also considering for the maintenance team to be moved to the second courtyard, but that requires upgrades. It requires cleanup and upgrades. That's not being proposed because of the priorities. But the space could be accommodated. With the Pinole project, it was set for those years because of priorities and how much funding it we take. We've discussed those projects, and of course your comments are welcome with regards to priorities, whether you would like us to shift any of the projects over the 5-year plan. I hope I covered all the questions. I'm not sure. Yes, that's the projects that's being set.
Actually, Mr. Mayor, can I just respond? So the Opinion project, as far as I understand it, is this particular phase is self-completed. And so while we will need to move on to that project, that will not impact our current project.
It would not, and we're expecting to complete the first phase by the end of this fiscal year. That's why it's not showing as part of the CIP.
Right. Thank you for answering those questions. Much appreciated. Any other public comments, City Clerk Bill?
There are no more public comments.
All right. We'll bring it back to committee for comments. Just at the top right there, the EV charging project is incredible. I'm very happy that we received that much funds from MTC, and to see the sheer number of chargers that is planned at least to be installed in the next 5 years is pretty incredible. You know, we have a select few. I know there's one public safety building. We might have a few, I think the public works facility to charge some staff cars we have there. But I think this is a really good move for our city, and looking forward to seeing this progress as time goes on. As we're talking about priorities, and this is really the function of the committee to speak on that a little bit before it goes to full council. A few things come to mind, right? I think Treasurer said it: roads, streets, lights, and that's really what I've seen in the community be expressed. Those sort of priorities there. Thinking about things like there's two parking projects here. It's a senior center auxiliary parking lot, FA 1901. To me, I wouldn't say that that's a priority personally for myself, and from what I've heard, I haven't heard many folks say, "Oh yeah, we got to build that parking lot next to the senior center." Sometimes I'll hear concerns about parking and that being an issue for some people. That's usually during special events. I want to continue conversations with the community about that in particular. That's a great parcel that could be used for a variety of things. I know one thing that Mayor Pro Tem had brought up over the past few years is community gardens. There are certain parcels that are appropriate for that. This may be one, we have to see. But as we prioritize roads, streets, and lights in the CIP, this for me would not be a priority, just from my perspective. Other things like the Plum Street parking lot, we had this conversation last budget season. I remember that the Planning Commission had brought up some comments about that project in particular with the chain link fence. And I think it was maybe not aligned with some aesthetic, some plans we had that could be better aligned there, design-wise. And then just generally, I haven't really got a clear answer in terms of the need For that, it's a public parking lot. I know in the project description it says there would also be a layout that would be improved for more, to include more cars, more parking, as well as bicycle parking. But then it also includes security gates for police vehicles. So and can you speak to the project just a little bit more in terms of the layout? Is there going to be a separate portion for law enforcement vehicles and a separate portion for public parking, or how does that sort of work?
Yes, and again, this particular project, we would love to have your input with regards to priorities and which year it needs to be set up. But I will just share an example. PD currently have vehicles that are parked on the street. And because of the water issues and coordination with East Bay Mud, they had to move a couple of vehicles to the courtyard because it's gated and to avoid the issues on the street. Purpose of this project is to establish secured parking for the PD fleet, and in addition to a redesign of the parking lot facility and allowing for additional parking for the public, and also other improvements such as the installation of bicycle parking.
Okay.
With that being said, again, it depends on the priorities. The senior center parking lot, the reason we pushed it to fiscal year 26-27 and 27-28, which could be considered now or in the future, but it hasn't been a priority as far as I know for the city, and could potentially be thought of for development project, as you say. So that's why we moved it to a future year.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And just moving along here, last thing I want to mention is the mural preservation. It's a very visible project just because it's on San Pablo Avenue. Folks walk, drive, bike down that road. Folks take the bus, particularly at the location, and it's not the best site. With the cost of $100,000, I think there's a lot to consider there. So I think that needs more. I wish we had more public comment just to comment on the entire CIP in general. Maybe that comes later, and we'll think more about that. But those are my comments for right now. Just generally, the parking projects, not really. I see myself as prioritizing that, and really just want to focus on deferred maintenance that we have to get really handled here. Mayor Pro Tem, any comments?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you do.
I guess my first question is, and I know we have another, do we have another presentation, I guess? Oh, last one? Got it. Okay. I did want to ask how much money we have right now to spend on CIP. I know that's...
We have
Another number?
various funding sources. The current balance for 25-26, well, actually, the estimated revenue for 25-26 adds up to $13,035,506.
13 million. Okay. So we're short of 13.6 million, right? For the first year. Like if we were to, right? I mean, it's, so 13 million is about what we have to work with. So I'm going to kind of start just down the list, right, of projects, right? Again, the EV charging, I think, is brilliant. That coming to the city is going to be huge. I agree with the mayor. I think that's something that we got to make sure that we close out on. Let's see. The Tiny Tots flooring and painting is $100,000 as a budgetary number. I think that's something that's doable within the 20 years that it hasn't happened. The parking lot for the senior center, wasn't that a solar project as well? Is there solar attached to that? Is that why it's $1 million?
Yes, there was solar attached to it. That project continues to evolve, and I think that's one of the reasons that we pushed it a little bit, is wanting to kind of bring it back to baseline and discuss it on a larger level of what direction council still wants, and the community still wants to proceed. Do we still include solar? Is it still this large parking lot? Is it a smaller parking lot with smaller solar? There's so many different options
Right.
on how we could move forward with that project.
Well, the reason why I kind of wanted to bring that up is that there's also $200,000 for emergency power for critical facilities. And that's something that we've been talking about can get looped into a senior center project, right? So I'm just trying to figure out if there's synergy between these projects. Like Tiny Tots, it's great to have the paint, great to have the flooring, but we know the roof was an issue, and that was something that we have on a separate project, or a separate line item for citywide roof repairs and replacement. So I'm trying to figure out, do we do Tiny Tots rehabilitation and then have was the roof good? Or maybe
It's like one of the only roofs that's okay.
sweet. Well, I know that we had a lot of them that were broken, so I remember that one was a couple years back, but maybe we already got it patched. Okay. Okay. no worries. Okay. The mural, obviously, that's a good one, but I think we pushed that one. The soccer field rehabilitation, so there's probably, another, hopefully another project there. The sewer, I think I was pretty clear about, like, I think we need to, everything sewer related needs to move. And whatever we have to do to kind of, it's a considerable amount of money. I think we got to push that as soon as we can. The ADA transition, the roads we talked about. I'll just go over the ones that I'm thinking, like the traffic calming program. I agree with the treasurer that maybe that's something that gets pushed to the next year while moving up some of the infrastructure issues. And then if there's opportunities to implement traffic calming while we're doing the larger project, that might be something we need to overlay in. City streetlights, definitely for it. Road maintenance repairs, road rehabilitation. I'm just saying all this really quickly, but I'm pretty sure like we'll, when you guys bring it back, try to capture everything. The pedestrian improvements at Tenant, near the railroad, we already talked about that. That's something that's already in, I think we had money from MTC about. The railroad. The recycle water, I know that we talked about that project. We did get a report back, but if it's looped into the sewer plant, is that something that we could draw? Because I think it's, if we had the space, it's something that we can use for Fernandez Park for irrigation upgrades if that hasn't happened. I definitely want to talk about more, but I think that kind of covers, those are the priorities that I'm having.
Great.
So
Perfect. Well, I think this was a really great discussion. Thank you again to staff for putting this together, and Treasurer and Mayor Pro Tem for having the conversation. Looking forward to seeing this come back to full council, and welcome in. I think this might be one of your first presentations here. So great work. And with that, I'm going to convene our meeting for today. Thanks so much.